20% of the world's oil is transported through a strip of water that is just 21 miles wide. Today on the Security Brief, the Strait of Hormuz. How does the United States defend the convoys that need to pass through it? And what are the threats? I've been speaking to a former Royal Navy commander who spent part of his career hunting and destroying naval mines in key shipping lanes. I'll tell you his thoughts. And Kharg Island, the isolated outpost that bankrolls Iran's economy. Is Washington planning on taking it? That's the Strait, the oil, and Donald Trump's endgame in Iran. Stay with us. This is the Security Brief. Mikey, let's start with the Strait of Hormuz. Why is it considered one of the most important waterways in the world?
Yeah, it's the second biggest behind the Malacca Strait, which joins Indonesia and Malaysia. And 20% of the world's daily oil supply comes through that strait. But also, you've got 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas supply coming from Qatar. And countries like India and the entirety of Asia, they're all heavily dependent on that LNG.
So it's a pinch point. When you look at the map, you can see why shipping through that point is restricted. How many tankers ordinarily, on a normal day, would pass through the strait?
Yeah, so pre-conflict, you're looking sort of a bandwidth of between 40 and 60 tankers. Let's take a look at a graphic, because we've got this brilliant time-lapse here, just sort of articulating or indicating just exactly what's going on. So those red arrows, if you look on the left of the screen, those red arrows are tankers, and you can see as they're approaching the tip of the strait, they're actually reversing on themselves, so they're in kind of a holding pattern. If you then come to the right, even more pronounced. You can see the red arrows on the right. They're all bunching basically as they come in to the strait. So yeah, I mean, and as you can see through the top, there's literally nothing there whatsoever.
So we know broadly what the Gulf states have in terms of oil and gas. Can we just take a look briefly at the oil industry in Iran?
Yeah, and what we've got to remember is we've got to context this with the sanctions that have been placed on Iran. So despite or in spite of all of that, we just put a graphic on. We can look at Iran's oil-producing capability. It's the 9th biggest crude oil producer in the world, Christian. The black dots, they're the oil fields. The blue dots, they're the refineries. And the green dots, I think these are the really important ones, they're the terminals on the coast.
You've identified there, I can see at the bottom of the map, Kharg Island, which is significant.
It is. It handles about 90% of Iran's crude oil export. But we'll look at the significance of that a little bit later on in the programme.
So when you look at that map, can you identify for me what has been struck?
Yeah, so if we play the graphic on, what you'll see now is some red dots come onto the screen. And there is a correlation between where the US and the IDF have been targeting the red dots and the oil infrastructure that we've just talked about. And we know that from some of the videos that you can see in the top left hand of the screen there that we've been witnessing.
And some of that would be energy infrastructure?
Yeah, so we've got a graphic here. Oil and liquefied natural gas has been struck across the Persian Gulf states by Iran. Let's just take a quick look. At the top, you've got Iraq and the Ramallah oil fields and the Basra oil terminal. Actually flew around those during the Iraq war. Saudi, you've got Ras Tanura oil refinery and port. Coming down from that, Qatar's energy facilities on the coast. As we said, 20% of the world's LNG supply comes from Qatar. Bahrain, we saw the Bapco oil refinery be struck, an oil terminal in the UAE as we come down the Persian Gulf. And actually today we saw storage tanks in an Omani port, and reports suggest that it was an Iranian drone that struck those oil facilities. OK,
so that gives us a broad picture of what could be targeted and also what Iran has at home in terms of oil and gas. Can we talk about the military side of this picture? What does Iran have in order to keep this stranglehold on the strait?
Yeah, so Iran has, let's take a look at a map actually. Iran has a layered military, offensive and defensive capability to dominate effectively either side of the strait, left-hand side of the screen to the top, right-hand side of the screen to the top. Now, conventionally, it's got ballistic missiles and anti-shipping missiles that are based along that coastline. Now, anti-shipping missiles are significant because they travel at 10 miles a minute, which, when you're looking at potential targets in that strait, is a 2-minute flight time from the Iran coast. We talk about the conventional threat, but there's an unconventional ability that Iran has. Yes, it's a great point. I think this is where we need to be zoning in on, and we will zone in on. This is all conventional military capability ballistic missiles, anti-shipping missiles, which the US is well equipped to destroy and degrade. We know that, we've seen that. However, Iran are the masters at asymmetric warfare. What does asymmetric warfare mean? Sabotage, suicide bombings, hit and run attacks. Basically, the objective of Iran's strategy won't be to destroy, but rather disrupt, frustrate, outlast, and deplete US and IDF stockpiles. Now, I was speaking to a former mine counters measures vessel, a minehunter, basically, which is a ship, and he was the captain, and he was operating in the Gulf and has operated in the Gulf, and he spoke to the threat of what are called go-fasts. Go-fast are fast attack boats, fast attack craft. I think we can see some video footage here. Quite small, nimble, agile, but they've got a significant gun on the front of that can do some damage. And even jet skis, there are reports of IRGC with a driver riding the jet ski and someone on the back with a rocket-propelled grenade. Again, it's not going to destroy anything, but it's going to do some damage.
And how would you defend against go fast?
Yeah, the fast attack boats. I mean, firstly, I think you've got to look at some of the weather conditions which actually make them quite dangerous. So around this time of year, it's obviously starting to get hot in the Persian Gulf. And what this does is it creates a humidity layer that's about 30 foot high that reduces visibility to about 1 to 3 kilometers. So if you've got a fast attack craft coming at you, or a swarm of fast attack craft, the captain and the ship's crews who are defending the ship are not going to see that till quite late on. So they become harder to detect and then obviously to counter. And the warship's radar is actually having to work way harder.
Right, and so if you were to defend against that, the machine guns that are on board these fast boats, what could you do? Yeah, varying types of machine guns. So you've got the miniguns. They have a number of high rounds per minute, general purpose machine guns. And then there's what's called the CIWS. That's called a close-in weapon system. On the American ships, it's called the Phalanx. On the British ships, it's called the Goalkeeper. But this is a picture now of the Phalanx system. It's basically a radar slew. That bit on the top there, that dome, that's a radar. And that radar slews the Gatling gun on that can fire up to 4,500 rounds a minute. But it's actually been adapted for ground defensive measures. Let's take a look at this video and just take a listen to this. What is that?
It's called a CRAM. It's called a counter rocket artillery and mortar. Effectively, it's the same Phalanx system that's on a ship, but it's been modified for ground operations. And I was operating at Baghdad International Airport on one of my tours, and there was a CRAM based on Baghdad International Airport. And when it goes off, and it was in quite close proximity, the noise is incredibly loud, and it's very, very distinctive. Yeah.
We haven't talked about mines, which are a traditional threat in shipping lanes. What do the Iranians have?
They have lots. And, speaking to this former commander, he was describing laying mines and mine huntings like a strategic chess game. Iranians do have mine-laying ships, which are actively being targeted by the US and the IDF. But the reality is all Iranian shipping can be used to deploy mines, including fishing vessels. The minute you say you have laid mines, this is another problem, because then it's up to the US to prove that mines haven't been laid. And it's massively labour-intensive, and it takes a lot of time.
And the types of mines they're using, what do they look like?
Basically old-fashioned ones, very similar to the ones you saw in World War II. Those big balls with the spikes coming off them. They're very dumb, but it's a contact explosion. And they're really hard to maintain in terms of clearing the area where they're in.
You don't have to do much with these, do you? Because there's highly flammable stuff on board ships, so you only need to make a contact with the ship, and then you cause a real problem. And what about the water that these mines are circulating in? I say circulating because there's something peculiar about the Strait of Hormuz.
This was fascinating, what he was saying. He was saying basically that in certain parts of the Strait and in certain parts of the Gulf of Oman, there are circular tidal currents. So what this means is that if a mine hunter goes in and clears a certain area, that area on a map can't be designated as clear in terms of a sea line of communication, because the tidal current will bring mines back into it.
So this is super interesting, because a lot of the focus in the last week in the analysis has been on the conventional threat. But we've got fast boats, we've got mines circulating in the water, we've got sea mist, which complicates things for radar, we've got jet skis, guys on the back with RPGs. When Donald Trump talks about force protection in the Strait of Hormuz, what does that really look like?
Well, we spoke about sort of the numbers of pre-conflict, which was 40 to 60 tankers a day. To get back to that frequency of traffic going through the Strait, I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. Let's take a look at what the US have that actually would be able to do that escort role. This is called a littoral combat ship from the US. The US Navy has around 28 globally at about 500 million a pop. But recent estimates place about 3 inside the Middle East. They're fast, I'll give them that, with speeds up to about 40 to 50 knots, which is supremely fast. So they're agile. These would be the solution, but the US would need to deploy a lot more than 3, and they would be placed in what's called a up threat position.
Right, so you'd have one at the front, maybe one in the middle, one at the back?
Yeah, I'd probably say 3 in the middle because of the 40 to 60 that we're talking about in order to get that supply going.
We talked about Iran as the third largest producer in OPEC. It pumps around 4.5% of global oil supplies. That's roughly about 3.3 million barrels a day. And a lot of that comes from one critical point on their landscape.
Yeah, in military parlance, we talk about these kind of infrastructures as centers of gravity. And also, on top of that, a critical vulnerability for Iran. Let's take a look. It's called Kharg Island. And you'll see on this, so Kharg Island, basically, we're coming back into the Persian Gulf. You'll see on this 3D graphic, just look at the oil production, the oil facilities on that. So this is the terminal. So basically, tankers come in. It's about 15 miles off the coast of Iran.
Is it separate from the coastline? I mean, it actually exists as an island, does it? There's water all around it?
Yeah, it's actually an island. It's about 15 miles off the coast. Incredibly vulnerable if the US decided to attack it, which I don't think they will, because that would defeat the purpose of actually getting their hands on the oil, which is what was the case in Venezuela. But it hosts Iran's main crude oil export terminal, and it's responsible for roughly 85 to 95% of all Iranian crude exports. So in practical terms, Kharg Island is the single most important piece of energy infrastructure that Iran possesses. So you take Kharg, you take Iran's economic lifeline, and not just Iran, the IRGC.
So they might not bomb it because environmentally that would be a disaster, quite naturally. And obviously they wouldn't have access to the oil and the gas, which we've seen in Venezuela they wouldn't mind taking. Is there a plan, do you think, forming to put special forces on it and take it?
Yeah, I've been looking on open source on intelligence channels and from sources as well, and there's chatter emerging of a high-profile Special Operations Command mission starting to surface. It's called a CONOP in the military, a concept of operations, using special forces to seize and hold Kharg Island. But the big question I've got on that is, what is Iran or the IRGC's course of action in order to retake that? Because either one of those sides are going to want to place missiles and
let's
compromise that infrastructure.
Let's presume that it is something that's being worked up. How would you actually go about it?
I mean, it would require significant combined operation. We call them composite air operations. You'd require air supremacy overhead. You'd need suppression of enemy air defense, basically clearing the way for the helicopters to go in. We saw the MH-47 Chinook during Venezuela and the MH-60 Black Hawks. I mean, they will be the helicopters of choice for any sort of special operations forces insertion. The island is defendable, but it's also very, very exposed in terms of, it's not far off the coast of Iran, 15 miles. But the harder problem, as I said, is holding it. Iran would move to immediately retake it. How many forces would it require? US forces, boots on the ground, to actually defend it, especially when you've got drones, fast attack craft, and possibly an amphibious counter-assault. I mean, that's certainly something that wouldn't be out of the question depending on what the IRGC capability is.
Yeah, that is real food for thought. Thank you very much, Mikey, for the analysis as ever. Just a reminder that if you want to see the back catalogue of the Security Brief, it is there on the BBC YouTube website. We'll continue, of course, to follow the war in Iran, but that's it for this week. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.